Hello, I'm Tim Hine from the Mission and Leadership Development Ministries Centre, and I'm here to present for you the strategic framework that the MLD board has discerned to focus and to shape how we might best fulfil our mandate over the next few years, certainly the next 5 years, perhaps beyond. You're going to hear a particular cultural value that we want to see strongly emphasised, and also five key focus areas that we think need to be given the highest priority in our activities. Of course, the mission of God is much more multifaceted than that. As Michael Frost has articulated in our event recently and in his latest book, mission is the shape of water. That is, it adapts and changes to fill the context it finds itself in. So in our congregations and in our lives and in our vocations, as well as our presbyteries and the synod, there are so many different dimensions to the way God's mission is expressed. We can't address them all, but what we've sought to do at this particular time is give priority to some focus areas that will most enable us to address and to equip people and to resource them in addressing it in their particular context at this particular time. The times are changing significantly, and one of the reasons we've gone through this process is to recognise the fast changing nature of our community, as well as some internal changes that have occurred as well, certainly in terms of the presbytery restructure across the synod as a whole, and then also, of course, the game-changing nature of COVID across the impact of our church and, of course, beyond our community as well. And that's actually impacted how I'm presenting this to you. This is not how I intended to do this, first of all, but I'm in isolation at the moment, and so this is the way I'm presenting it to you. And perhaps it's the most authentic way to share it with you first of all. So here we go. One of the things that we particularly note, first of all, in the Synod is a cultural, when we think about culture and values, is a certain strain of a few elements that are listed here. They don't, they are not all that we consist of. Of course, there are many other things that you would use to describe our culture. However, these elements are present and they particularly jumped at us, and we note them because we think that they are ones that particularly mitigate against us engaging more deeply in the mission of God. We sense a certain sadness across the life of the church and of congregations, a certain hopelessness at times, certainly some anxiety and some fear. I think there is a sense in many congregations and places of wondering what is up ahead, a fear of or even dread of the future. Where are we going? What are we supposed to be doing? And that fear can be about the change that's happening around us, or the lack of change perhaps that's happened inside our communities. And so that fear can actually lead to a paralysis, a feeling of, well, we don't know what to do, or is it too late to do anything at all? That, and related to that, can lead to a certain insular perspective of who are we anyway, and why are we here, and what is our future? And that can also consist of a certain apathy, a certain complacency of, well, I guess we can make the best of what's here now and who we are. And I think that leads us to looking away from the opportunities and certainly the needs that are there in our community into which we might be able to step, alerting people to the good news of Jesus and the reign of God. We think there also is some level of guilt that exists in the church around its decline. The sociological factor of what's occurred with the church over decades is something that is difficult to reconcile for many people, and some sense of questioning what do we do or not do that has meant we've ended up here. There also, that can lead to some blame. Whose fault is it that we are where we are? And that question, I think, that permeates all the way through these points, we feel, is that question of where is our joy? Where did our joy go? Because this is the context into which God has called us. We have the gospel, we have Christ, and this is the place into which he has sent us, at this place and at this time. And so we actually think that there needs to be some level of significant cultural shift in the midst of our culture. something that's more hopeful, joyful, hope-filled, overflowing with a sense of abundance, of hospitality and of courage, which is looking outwards, inviting in, being willing to take risks. And actually, if you think about the fact that our cultural context is changing so dramatically, should draw upon us or from us an appetite to experiment more, to try different things. And yet you can't do that when you're looking insularly or paralyzed. You need to have something else that invites you to say, well, it's safe to fail. That's a level of confidence that we think needs to be increased in the temperature and the culture of the life across our church. And we think that doesn't come from just enthusiasm or from optimism. It actually needs to come from the renewal that only Jesus Christ enables, which is to say it needs to come from the gospel. The gospel is the thing that can renew us. And so we think that, speaking right at the heart of our framework, we think that we would love to see gospel joy as being a key value that is raised, emphasised, and at the centre of the life of the Synod. We're inspired by this particular quote from Leslie Newbigin, and many of you will have seen this before. The Leslie Newbigin was a missionary in India, but then also a missiologist, that is, writing about the nature of mission, particularly when he went back to England, writing about at the end of the 20th century and describing the profound change that's occurred in the Western world. His writings are fantastic, and this is one particular quote that captures what we feel. And he says here, there has been a long tradition which sees the mission of the church primarily in terms of obedience to a command. It's been customary to speak of the missionary mandate. This way of putting the matter is certainly not without justification, and yet it seems to me that it misses the point. It tends to make mission a burden rather than a joy, to make it part of the law rather than part of the gospel. If one looks at the New Testament evidence, one gets another impression. Mission begins with a kind of explosion of joy. The news that the rejected and crucified Jesus is alive is something that cannot possibly be suppressed. It must be told. Who can be silent about such a fact? The mission of the church in the pages of the New Testament is more like the fallout from a vast explosion, a radioactive fallout that is not lethal, but rather life-giving. One searches in vain through the letters of St. Paul for any suggestion, or to find any suggestion that he anywhere lays it on the conscience of his readers, that they ought to be active. They ought to be active in mission. For himself, it is inconceivable that he should keep silent. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. But nowhere do we find him telling his readers that they have a duty to do so. It's a striking fact, moreover, that almost all of the proclamation of the gospel which are described in proclamations of the gospel that are described in Acts are in response to questions asked by those outside the church. And so, of course, you need to live a questionable life. What are you doing that alerts people to and prompts questions about why you're doing it that way? And so living a missional life authentically that flows out of gospel joy is, we think, the only safe value to raise, in particular, to emphasize, to promote gospel activity and missional activity. It's not that we should be doing mission. It's that when we grasp the gospel and look again to the gospel, it flows out of us a gratitude that invites us, that prompts us out into mission. So we think in particular that value is one that could lie at the heart. It's not mere activity. It's not mere enthusiasm. It's not mere optimism that's self-generated. It's joy that flows rather from Jesus through the gospel. So there we go. Now, I want to present to you the broader strategic framework, which is informed by the review, but in the discernment that we've done since, we've taken it and put it together into some priority areas. And this is going to explain for you, firstly, the why, which is what I've given you there in the gospel joy, why we go about what we're doing. But it also is going to talk about 5 key focus areas, which is the what. It's also going to talk about the who in terms of the staff team and those that we have on the team and part of the MLD, and how we're going to go about that. But then also the how we're going to go about that, some ideas of the way in which that mission is going to be addressed. There will be much in this for you to engage in and learn from, adapt yourself in different areas, whether it's presbyteries or congregations or other projects and programs and working groups and committees and interest groups, and of course in our ordinary life of mission, vocation and discipleship as well. But these are the things in particular that we hear the church saying it invites some resourcing in. So here we go. The what. The first what, and these are not in order, there are 5 of them, but they're not in order, but I will come to one in a moment that I think should take the lead. This one, though, is faith, vitality and formation. That is, we hear the church saying it wants resourcing to know how to grow faith vitality in all stages of life. You would have seen this in the review summary if you have read it, that there is a strong indication, particularly from ministers, naming faith vitality and renewal as being high on the list of things that they would benefit from greater resourcing in. Important to note, this is not just education. It certainly is Christian education, teaching people about the faith, but also experiences and encounters, the heart and the hand as well. And so also the way that's lived out into practices. This is really about discipleship, the core business of discipleship, how to grow faith vitality in all stages of life with all people. Intergenerational is a word that we've used a lot, and we've particularly framed it in terms of the younger stages of life, intergenerational ministry, rather than seeing ages as silos. And what we want to see is actually a view of intergenerational ministry that occurs all the way through life as well. What does it mean to grow in your faith at all the different stages of life? It's something that needs to go out of the grace and gospel dynamic. That is, it's not law, what you ought to do in following Jesus, but what you are able to do as the gospel transforms you. It's about moving beyond the comfort zone as the gospel takes us into a different way of living, a more radical and faithful way of living in response to the faithful God. It should come through our preaching and worship as well, but not only, but certainly there as well, and of course through the sacraments as part of that. But it also has implications for covenanting, and I'll come to that in particular a little bit later on, but you'll see that one mentioned in each of the priority focus areas. So that's the first one. We hear the church saying that we need resourcing on how to grow faith vitality in all stages of life. The next one I want to present to you is congregational renewal. That is, how to lead a congregation through renewal into a new future. The first one is kind of about personal renewal. This one is about congregational renewal, inviting every congregation to embrace the fact that renewal opens up possibilities for them in the future. It's not just a case of the status quo or going back to the way things were or closing. There are actually many options that are available, and each congregation can be invited to consider what they are. It could be about doing a particular renewal process or a change management process, doing things differently. It could be about appreciative inquiry, going back and finding what the core charism and of that congregation has been and how it could be reignited again. It could be about amalgamating with another congregation. It could be about a congregation making hospitable room for a church plant to cohabit alongside with it and pass the baton, perhaps into the future, or just coexist together. Or it could actually be about changing the way the congregation exists, moving to be a faith community, something more nimble or more intimate that meets in a different place perhaps, or meets where it meets, but in a different way or at a different time, in a different purpose. Or it could be about holding that, asking the Presbyterian Synod to hold the mission in their behalf, because they will close as a congregation, and that there might be space for someone else to take that forward, that mission forward in that particular way. All of these, there are options, and there are probably others as well in terms of also starting new congregations. But thinking through renewal, we hear the Synod saying it needs help to think through and to work through how we might carefully, pastorally, but courageously lead a congregation through renewal into a new future. It will involve some very important legacy pastoral work as well, recognizing the faithful way that congregations have been participating in God's mission up to that point, or up till now, and also considering where it might do that from here on. It's about change strategies, practically. It's about cultural change in congregations, and it's about the skill of community building, and continue, which is a never-ending process, and which involves something of renewal. It also, as you'll note, has covenanting named there as well, and I'll come to that in just a moment. So that's the second key area, that is congregational renewal, and that seems to be something of which we are all importantly a part. The third area is about local community mission, and practically, and evangelism. So whether these are one or two focus areas, we've put them together because it's profoundly important that they flow in and out of one another. Wesley talked about these being so deeply complementary. And that is, we think congregations, or we hear congregations and people and the church asking to be resourced in the area of local mission. That is what is termed in the review helpfully informal care. We recognise that there can be partnership with formal care, which might be provided by a welfare agency, but there is a place for the church to be offering informal care in the local neighbourhood and with the people around about them. There's this notion of being a chaplain to the neighbourhood. That's not in a formal sense like chaplaincy, but certainly that presence of being aware of people, engaged with people, pastorally present to people in our local community. It's also about stepping in and responding, alerting and demonstrating the gospel through justice, mercy and advocacy with people and with the issues that they are facing in the community around about us. And again there, of course, I've put the important role of covenanting, which I'll come to in a moment. So that practical demonstration of the gospel in mercy and advocacy and informal care, being of a practical service to people in our local community, is something, how we might do that. Then also how we can actually proclaim the gospel. So how we can actually share and talk about our faith and bear witness to it in faithful ways. There is a sense of public theology in this. I think in the world that we live in, whether it's online or in person, every time we speak of the gospel, we are actually engaging in some form of public theology, because we can't presume that anyone knows anything much at all about the gospel and about Christianity, or if indeed they do, it may be a caricature. So actually, we're thinking about that and how to do that and how to articulate that well, incisively, and appropriately and faithfully, and empowering every Christian to do that as well. But then importantly, learning how community action and evangelism interweave with one another. So this is very much a neighbourhood focus, empowering people in the different parts diversely across our state and across our synod and regional areas, how to demonstrate and alert people to the good news of Jesus locally in these ways. And to be able to do that, then certainly here is the fourth area. We need to grow in our intercultural capacity. That is, we hear the church saying that it wants to be resourced on how to read and discern the complexity of contemporary cultures in order to engage faithfully. We have a vast changing culture, and it's not just one culture either. There are layers of cultural aspects to our culture and our community. And we actually think that as ministry agents, we need to have a sophisticated and informed understanding of our context. Not a simplistic one, not one that's just presented by one particular media outlet or one experience with one person or who's in our church already, but actually to have a nuanced and sophisticated understanding of the layers of culture in our area and that's playing out in the culture more broadly. Recognizing the important place, firstly, that the multicultural dimension, by being multicultural, that by definition invites the fact that we need to have an understanding of multi-cultures and faiths and perspectives. That includes the secular faith, so an understanding of secularism and how that works and what it means. What posture do you take and how do you engage with people who are discipled in a secular worldview? It also has to do with our international partnerships as well. The partnerships overseas are new and emerging that we might remain in faithful solidarity with and may learn from and engage with as well. It means in totality that we need to have a robust missiology and intercultural theology. What that means is that we have an informed and faithful way of engaging in God's mission, not just with default or familiar parts of our culture, but with many other parts of the culture as well, that follows the rhythm of the gospel, that we have an understanding of how Christianity relates to and interweaves with different parts of the culture and how that mission activity might happen more faithfully. This is where figures such as Leslie Newbigin before are incredibly helpful, but of course there's an enormous amount that's occurred since his time. And again, there I've mentioned covenanting, and you can see that very explicitly as well, that the particular covenant relationship that we have with the UAICC and the solidarity that that demonstrates with the first peoples of this country recognise that that cultural engagement could have been done more faithfully and needs to be part of the reconciliation and renewal. And that's where I come to the fifth area. So just on that fourth one then, courses at UCLT and other things will be framed around how to grow our intercultural capacity, that we might have confidence to engage in the world in a faithful way with the gospel. And this is the fifth one, although actually I want this to be the first one. None of these are in priority order, but I've left it last because it informs each of them. And that is a covenant come alive. How we hear the church asking, how can our covenant relationship be experienced and lived into more richly? It was a pretty significant year this year when every Australian was invited through the referendum to consider the nature in detail of our relationship with First Peoples and Second Peoples in Australia. In past that referendum then, we're thinking about how covenanting might be done in a new way, in a different way. That is a way in which we see as a high priority, and this certainly came through the review as well, that understanding and placing this relationship, as the review termed it, I think helpfully, as our first family relationships, are a profound part of how we understand ourselves to be an Australian church and to be Australian Christians engaged in God's mission in Australia. So we hear the church asking to be resourced in broadening, deepening and personalising our understanding of the covenant relationship between UCA and the UAICC. Understanding and learning from the mission history, that is the story of the preamble tells about the way in which there was good intentions, it says, but unfaithful also, and ways of going about that mission story. And we have a lot to learn from that in terms of the way we engage with mission into the future. And that speaks directly to our need to grow our intercultural understanding, both for secular people, but then also for multicultural context, and then also with the First Peoples. We need to participate in the process of shaping and serving reconciliation and renewal in Australia. And lastly there, deepening Second Peoples' understanding of First Peoples' spirituality for mutual Christian discipleship. So we think this is a pretty important focus area. This needs to be a high priority. And actually, that's why it's not just a focus area, but actually the covenanting then is named in each of the others as well. It's a demonstration of the way in which the different focus areas actually relate to one another, and they inform one another as well. That is that our covenant relationship invites us to think about faith vitality as well. What does it mean to be a faithful Christian in Australia, following Jesus? That's an important question, and we think that that's not unrelated to when we see our reconciliation in Christ, then our reconciliation with others with whom we're in covenant relationship and in the land more generally. That's related to our covenant renewal. It's clearly related to the way we do local mission in Australia. And then also, of course, it's related to our intercultural capacity, but it's there as a priority. So those are the areas, those are the 5 focus areas that we think need to be given priority emphasis in the resourcing that we participate in as mission resourcing, but actually the whole MLD as well. You'll see in the middle there the question of how. And this is something that will be worked out with the team, but we've named 5 different ways that quite clearly we can engage in this resourcing. The bottom one there you'll see is UCLT courses. We certainly see a greater interrelationship between UCLT, Uniting College for Leadership and Theology, and the mission resourcing activity. We actually think that running these things as we design the year and how things unfold should be complementary. That when we're offering a conference or a training event, that can be something that's connected into and complementary with what's running through the college. Certainly, you've got up the top there, deep and inspiring training conferences. That what we run that can be inspiring for the heart, but also offers some deeper training that engages the mind as well. We want to do that in different ways. We also look at, down the bottom, you can see there, catalytic experiences, such as walking on country and immersion trips into other cultural contexts to see and to learn from and to share. We also see the web hub, social media accountability. That is that we are able to share online much more of the resources that are gathered. And so often we'll run something and people say, hey, can I get the recording of that afterwards? But we actually would love to see that online presence of that resourcing being given a greater strength and being able to be shared through social media in a way that can resource people in short ways and longer ways and more substantial ways and in creative ways. But perhaps the other idea that's on here, and it is just an idea, but it gives an insight into the way in which we think resourcing can happen in the future in this season, is this idea of the Connecting Mission Lab. That is, we actually see that a significant amount of what we need to do in the new missional environment that we find ourselves in is not always to receive big chunks of new information, but we actually need to test out and journey together some of the information that we do have. In the review, we heard that people in ministry are seeking companions to adapt to uncharted contexts because they're making it up as they go along. There's a sense by which you're feeling out what to do next. And to help us to have that safe to fail kind of risk-taking atmosphere, we need places where we can test ideas and to clarify our thinking, to share together and to collaborate in prayer. I think often in ministry, we often feel some level of paranoia of being observed. And what if I get it wrong and make the wrong move? We actually need places to share where something didn't work and what we learned from that, or what we're going to try to do and how we can do that together. So that kind of resourcing is a little bit different. And where it occurs, it's enormously rich and it's highly relational. So this is just one idea of a mission lab that might be located in different places across the city. It might be monthly or it might be a little bit less than that, but this is just an idea. It could consist of an initial talk or paper by a thought leader or a reflective practitioner on an idea. But then it actually has not just a little bit of engagement, but extended engagement, unpacking and workshopping and talking through and testing ideas. It could be recorded and podcasted and broadcast to everyone else. And then there could be a lot of story sharing. Here's something that worked. Here's something that didn't work. Here's something that we think is being tested. And here's an intuition that we have. We actually need to have that strong sense that we are involved in the mission of God together, and that we're in a new environment, and that we need to try some new things, and that how we might be able to together learn from one another and collaborate with one another is a profound part of the way in which I think we can be resourced, or we hear the church saying it seeks to be resourced by being able to test out things and intuitions and learn from one another. That, I think, brings not just joy, but a great sense of relief and collaboration and therefore solidarity. I think that's actually the way the mission of God is supposed to work. And that's what we see occurring through the New Testament at its best. The last point I wanted to name for you there inside the framework there is the who. And that is that we're seeking the mission resourcing team to take a posture, a role of being mission activators. That is, we don't have the resources to have a particular staff member who is addressing particular siloed areas right across the mission of the church. We actually need the team to work in a more integrated way, working together and giving priority to these focus areas, but actually also then being conduits to the whole church. We haven't got single experts for every specific area of mission and ministry. What we do have is faithful people who can spend the time and energy with some expertise, but mainly as conduits, connecting and bringing resources together one to another. And so the staff team of mission resourcing will be gathered as mission activators. They will be organised and managed by the team leader and be working very closely then with UCLT. Because in addition to the team of mission activators, we will also, each of the faculty members of the college will be giving a percentage of their time to thought leadership in the resourcing of one particular focus area. So there's going to be a greater level of cooperation and collaboration that occurs across the MLD as we all seek to give priority focus to these areas of focus. Again, they're not the only things that we think need to happen, but we think that by resourcing these particular areas, we're hitting upon, firstly, some high priority focus areas, but also in a way that is going to be able to most effectively help us in mission in other places. We need to be able to do these things well, and that will flow out into other areas as well, where we might have a particular interest or a particular focus in a particular way and place. Now, you may have many questions that have come out of this, or you may have tuned out long before now. Either way, I'm more than willing to be available to engage in some online sessions about this with question and answer, and the details of that will be provided in the UCE News and distributed around. But I hope this has been helpful in showing where we believe God is calling us to give priority focus in order that we might help the whole church, wherever we are and everywhere we are, to enter more fully into the mission of God. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen and to engage in the work of MLD. Thank you for your prayers and your participation in the review, and may God bless you as you discern where God's calling you into the future. God bless you.